a battle that even Albert Einstein warned was among the most disturbing political phenomena of our time. So get ready to dive into the unknown. Again, my name's Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, Ken McCarthy. Hey, Ken.
Right, love that. I love that greeting. Thank you, guys.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. I always loved, past history and past controversies and conspiracy theories, and I always loved that stuff. So I kind of stay away from the modern day conspiracy theories just because you know how things are. But when it comes to JFK and Abraham Lincoln and all these Hitler, I just love it. I love it. So I appreciate people like you that write these amazing books, and as we can see on the screen, it's JFK and his brother RFK, and it's amazing to have you here, and I'm excited to talk about what you've put together for us.
Great. Well, and you have the distinction of being the first podcast to cover the book.
Really? Well, I feel honored.
Yeah. More will come on board once they get it. I actually have some pretty high level assassination scholars that have privately told me this book's off the charts. One of them gave a copy to Bobby Kennedy. They haven't come out yet and endorsed it, but they will. And once that happens, this book will get around.
So let's start with, before even the book itself. You've written some great books in the past, and I'm sure there's more to come. But what started you on this? Because it's not your day job. So how did you get started writing the books about a little controversial?
Yeah. So I basically make my money elsewhere. And then blow it on these books, and
you sound like me.
But yeah, right. And it's good. It's all good. It's a good thing to do with one's time. Well, actually, I lived in San Francisco in the 1990s. I was a bona fide internet commercialization pioneer. In fact, I have a book coming out on that subject soon. And San Francisco is the cesspool of American political corruption. And I saw things going on that I couldn't even believe. And by the way, how many people know that Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Dianne Feinstein, and the other one, I can't think of her name. I always forget it. I want to block her name out. All three of those people are products of one political machine, and that is the Willie Brown machine. Huh. So anyway, I was there when Willie Brown was destroying San Francisco, getting the destruction of San Francisco.
He was the mayor, correct?
He was the mayor, yeah. He was the mayor for a while. And he brought all those people in, trained them up, got them their leg up, and now they're out there doing what they do. And I looked at San Francisco, and I was really in. I mean, I have been to events, small events, where there were 3 billionaires in the room, like a 20-person cocktail party. So I was at that level. But then I would walk around the streets of San Francisco in the 90s, and now it's much worse. But I would walk around the streets of San Francisco and go, what the heck's happening to this city? And I'd hear about the kids. There's no hot water in the bathrooms in the public schools. I mean, it's just horrific. And I thought, this is the first digital age banana republic. And boy, was I right. So I wanted more local reporting, because the local reporting predictably is terrible. Mainstream news media people are horrible, in my opinion, for the most part. So as a model, like a demo model, I started doing in-depth reporting. In fact, believe it or not, they say the first news blog in history was 1998, and it was about a hurricane. No, the first news blog was 1997, and that was my coverage of the election fraud that Willie Brown engineered in San Francisco to give the 49er owner Edward DeBarlo $250 million free dollars.
Wow!
So that was my first experience of in-depth journalism. I guess I caught the bug, and now that was 97. I don't know how many years. It's a lot of years later, and I still, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
There's always something. There's always something going on.
Always something, and I always say, "That's it. I'm done. I've done my bit. Now I'm going to enjoy myself." But I apparently I enjoy doing this too, so I do it. But I've got 14 books out there.
Wow.
Two of them are on marketing, because that's my original profession. But the rest of them are on current events. And this book, even though it's history, does have a big impact on what's going on in the world today.
Yeah, and I have to say, with everything going on over in Israel and Gaza, it does have a connection there too. And because in fact, I wanted to start with, talking about how even JFK because on his about how his perspective on Israel and the reflection of some of his statements and influence that the U.S. foreign policy, had during his administration. Can you talk a little bit about some of his reflections on and perspective on Israel?
Absolutely. And it's not just Israel. He does not get the credit that he deserves. The right wingers love to trash him.
Right.
And even the left wingers like Noam Chomsky like to say, well, he was just a cold warrior. He was just another one of those guys.
I loved him. I thought he was great.
And, well, you know what? Here's the truth about JFK. Was he perfect? No. Am I
No,
perfect?
nobody's perfect.
Has any human being ever lived? No, of course not.
No,
But, but maybe, yeah, you and me are the one except
we're the
two
perfect
exceptions.
ones. Yes.
But he was truly an anti-imperialist. Okay, we even have a book on that. And I'll just show. It's called John F. Kennedy, Anti-Imperialist, right? And even when he was a senator in Massachusetts, when there was no political advantage to him at all, he gave long speeches from the Senate floor saying, "Look, we've got the French in Indochina. We got to stop this because it was a war then. The war in Vietnam went on forever, and it started with the French." And he was saying, "Look, guys, this is not good. This is not good for the planet. It's not good for the Vietnamese people. It's not even good for the French." He also gave a very long speech about France was also in Algeria fighting a counterinsurgency war and killing lots and lots of civilians. And again, there was no benefit to him to give these speeches. In fact, he was swimming against the tide. So John F. Kennedy, and you never hear about this, right?
Right.
John F. Kennedy had a long history of standing up for the United States being a force of good. He said, let's be competitive with the rest of the world, all right? But let's be friendly with the rest of the world, right? Let's not, he was against coups, he was against assassinations, he was against all this stuff. And of course, there were a lot of people embedded in the Washington, D.C. monster who love all that stuff and make their bread and butter from it. So he already was he was far along the anti-imperialist path. Now, he had actually been to Palestine before it became Israel. And he wrote a letter to his dad, and it appears in the book. And he very respectful, very sympathetic to the people that were emigrating to Israel. But he said, this is not going to end well unless unless the people that are moving in here start calming down a little bit.
Right.
And there's even a quote. Do I have it on the book? Yeah. He said, I cannot. Well, this was a speech he gave later in 1963. I cannot believe that Israel has any real desire to remain indefinitely a garrison state surrounded by fear and hate. So he was aware in the 60s, and by the way, many great Americans, generals, secretaries of state, were very concerned about this this splitting up of Palestine, and we're going to give one half to one group and one half to another group. And you know who was concerned? And we have his letter in the book too. Albert Einstein.
Which, when I heard that's in your book. I mean, who talks about that? I don't remember hearing that before.
You never did, until I started researching, I never did either. Since we brought up Albert Einstein, let me give you. Everybody needs to know this little historical fact. During the Nazi era, the Nazis passed a law called the Nuremberg Laws. And basically, first they paved the road by saying, we need to know who every Jew is. We need to know their name, their address. If you got 3 drops of Jewish blood, you're Jewish, and you got to go into the database, which, by the way, IBM provided them to build. This is a really interesting part of history. Without IBM, we might not have ever had some of those problems that occurred there. So once they did that database, then they said a couple of years later, hey, you know what? If you're Jewish, you can't be a professor. You can't be the head of a medical faculty. You can't be the head of a hospital. Wow. And all these very skilled, very talented, very dedicated human beings were kicked to the curb. Einstein was one of them.
Wow.
Guess what the first, guess
Talk
what
about a mistake.
I mean, idiocy, right? Well, that's the thing about tyrants, right? They're good bullies, but they're basically brain dead. And thank God they usually shoot themselves in the foot. Right. Unfortunately, they shoot a lot of innocent people along the way. But guess who the first country was to raise their hand and say, Albert, come
over here.
A Muslim country.
Really?
Turkey.
I did not know that.
Believe me, man, the real, you know this because you've done this show for so long. You've probably learned things that you just never heard of before. And yeah, the Turkish government said, listen, here, Albert Einstein, we know who you are. And here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to make you the head of the physics department of the National University. And then, of course, Princeton came along and said, Albert, we have a better deal. You don't even have to work. We'll give you an office. We'll send you to Princeton. You can wander around the woods thinking great ideas. You don't have to punch a clock. You don't have to say
Wow.
he went to the United States and got that deal. But the first people that stood up were the Muslim Turks to help a Jewish person. Keep that. Everybody needs
Keep
to
that in
know this
mind.
history.
Yeah.
And the history is very suppressed. In fact, my book, it, it's all about the suppressed history of what's really going on in Israel, who's really in charge of Israel, what's their fundamental philosophy, and the Kennedys were pushing back hard in the summer of 1963.
Hmm.
And if you like, I could go into the ways they were pushing back.
I would love, yeah, no, please. I want to hear it.
Okay. And many of our books, not all of them, but many of our books, we like to have sort of introductory essays, but we also like to have lots of original documents. For example, everybody loves to talk about the Nuremberg Code. Oh, the Nuremberg Code this, the Nuremberg Code that. We're the only people that put the Nuremberg Code into print
Hmm.
in 12 different languages so that people can instead of talking about it in vague terms, you can hold it in your hands and read it. So that was our philosophy with the RFK JFK book. We have the actual we have Einstein's letter. He signed an editorial that appeared in the New York Times. We have young John F. Kennedy's letter to his father explaining what he saw in Palestine. We have all these things. So and then the other and some of this stuff, the reason you don't know it and the vast majority of people don't know it is a lot of this stuff was classified. Not the
Uh,
letters to the New York Times,
right.
but diplomatic cables, telegrams, letters, memorandums. They were literally classified until very recently. So there was no way to know. But now it's 2024 now, and we know. So number one, on the JFK side, he was as people that know the history know, he was not a fan of nuclear weapons. He was against above ground, open air testing of weapons. He actually succeeded in getting a test ban and against testing nuclear weapons in the open air. To him, and he stated this many times in public speeches, he saw that as the first step. First that, now we stop adding weapons. Then the next step is we start dismantling nuclear weapons and get rid of them.
Hmm.
That was JFK's dream. He stated it. He was working on it. No debate about it, right? Now, Israel did not have nuclear weapons at the time, and they were trying to develop them. And they have a nuclear research facility in the Sinai Peninsula. And JFK was writing directly, not he wasn't sending back channel obscure messages by, messenger. He was writing directly to the premier or the prime minister of Israel at the time saying, we have to get into your nuclear research facility and we have to inspect it because you've said that you don't have nuclear weapons, you're not developing them, and we need to confirm that. And if you don't let us in, there's going to be a problem. Now, he wasn't threatening of invasion. He was just saying, we're not going to pay your bills anymore.
Right.
And this is, people might say, well, oh, this is a conspiracy theory. No, we have the cables, we have the telegrams, we have the letters, and you can read them in the book. I'm a big believer in don't tell people a document exists. Tell them it exists, but let them read it themselves. So
Right.
that's one of the things in the book. So that's on the JFK side. On the RFK side, and remember, he was Attorney General at the time,
Mm-hmm.
he was attempting to get the Israeli government to obey the foreign lobbying laws. Okay. Now, what
Mm.
are those laws? And we have the text of the law in the book. It's from 1934. FDR put it through because why? The Nazis were trying to influence American government, and Roosevelt realized that's not a good thing. So we need a law to regulate foreign governments when they're doing propaganda in the United States. So the law is very simple. If you're a foreign country, and you want to influence Americans, and if you want to influence more than one American, so I could influence you, right? I could be from, Uzbekistan, and I'll try to influence you.
Right.
But if there's two of you, if you got your, friend of yours, and we're in a bar, and I'm an agent of that country, and I'm being paid, and I'm trying to influence you, I've just committed a federal crime. I have to actually report, hey, I met with Tony and his friend Bob at the bar and grill, and
Mm-hmm.
I bought him 2 beers, and I told him Uzbekistan's a great country. I'm required by law to report that I met with you and to show the message that I gave you. Okay. Every country in the world follows that law except one. And I bet you're going to know which one that is. And Robert Kennedy was telling the Israeli government, look, you guys, I mean, he was actually telling the propaganda arm, which was posing as a private foundation, you guys have to follow the law. You can't be influencing our politicians and our news media and throwing money all over the place. You have to show us where your money's coming from, where you're spending it, what the messages are, and how you're disseminating them. And the Israeli government was pushing back hard, and we have all the letters from them pushing back hard in the book. So these two things, and by the way, Israel did get nuclear weapons. They did develop nuclear weapons.
Right.
So Israel's got nuclear weapons now, and they have a free pass on lobbying, quote, lobbying, I call it bribing, U.S. politicians, news media, and other people. And the Kennedys were trying to shut that down in the summer of 1963. Not a conspiracy theory, not conjecture.
Right.
We have the actual documents. Finally, they've been declassified.
Wow. Wow. And I
Yeah.
know you have, like, in your book, like 38 historical documents. Is that right?
I'd have to, it's a funny thing. I always see these interviews and they ask the author, well, what about this in your book? And the author goes, I have to check my book. I don't know how many. Offhand, I don't know. I'm sorry. But that sounds about right. That sounds about right.
So these documents itself, because like you said, many of us that are in this field, we've never heard of these. So how difficult was it to research and discover these documentation? Because, like, there's people, I'm surprised they haven't been found before and really made public.
Well, let me explain why you haven't heard about them being made public. A surprising number of assassination researchers and research organizations and research media happens to be subsidized by people who are very pro-Israel.
Oh,
Okay.
got
The
it.
guy who financed Oliver Stone's JFK
Mm-hmm.
movie is actually the guy that illegally brought triggers for nuclear weapons to Israel.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't have his name offhand, but he's also a Hollywood producer, and he's known as a producer. But his real job was to help Israel get the nuclear bomb, and his job was to ferry illicitly sourced triggers to Israel. So that's the guy that financed JFK. Okay,
Wow.
now the movie, it gets even. I mean, it doesn't get worse. But here's another example. Some people may be aware of Frank Church. He was a senator in the 1970s. And after J. Edgar Hoover died, finally, may he rest in peace, but I'm glad he's gone, because he was a terror,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone was afraid to go against him. But as soon as he died, then you had Watergate as well. Now suddenly people were a little bit more courageous in Congress to do stuff. And what Frank Church did was he did those amazing hearings on the CIA, on JFK assassination, on the RFK
Right.
assassination,
Right.
on MK Ultra. Much of what we know about all that stuff came from Frank Church.
Oh,
Frank Church
really?
was, oh yeah, man. There's a great book, and it's The Last Honest Man. I think that's the name of it. I think it just came out in 2023 by Tom Rice, Rise, I believe, a very serious scholar. Um, I recommend that book to you and to all your viewers because it's deep. Who financed Frank Church? Well, he was from Idaho. Not a lot of money in Idaho. Idaho's a lovely place. All his money came out of Hollywood. All his finance for his campaigns came out of Hollywood. So yeah, there you go. And he was a good guy. I'm not taking anything away from him, but his investigation somehow managed to miss this piece
Hmm.
of the story.
Right.
And there's another reason we missed the piece of the story. And this is mind-boggling. And again, it might sound conspiracy theory, but all the scholars, the serious guys agree. There was a guy, very little known. You may know him because you're familiar with assassination history, James Jesus Angleton.
Mm.
Okay, and he was the head of counterintelligence from roughly 19. I don't have the dates right here, but it was like 55 to 77 or something like that. 20 years. He was very much like J. Edgar Hoover. He was very much like Anthony Fauci. He made his own job, and he kept it. Like he was in for life. There he is. Oh my God. Oh my God. We need to put a cross out there to try to. This was a bad dude. This was a
He
really
looks
bad dude.
like it too. His eyes look dark.
Oh, he was. Whew. What can I say about this guy? All right, I can say two things about him. He was the head of counterintelligence, again, from roughly, I'm going to say roughly, I could be wrong on the dates, pardon me, 55 to 77. What is counterintelligence? It's spying on the spies. It's also making sure that your own agency's covert operations are kept secret now and forever. Okay. So
Hmm.
the counterintelligence head is a very important job. Anybody who's doing anything covert had to run it by Angleton to make sure that it was, the security was in
Mm-hmm.
place and so on and so forth. So that's number one. Now, by bizarro circumstances, he also happened to be the head of the CIA Israeli desk simultaneously. This is an unprecedented thing in the history of the CIA. Usually people have one job at a time. But not only was he head of counterintelligence all those years, he was also head of the Israeli desk for all those years. Now, what does being head of the Israeli desk mean? Originally, Central Intelligence was sold as Central Intelligence. We'll get all this intelligence, we'll pile it up, we'll file it. If somebody needs to
Right.
know something, they'll come in and find out about it, right? Of course, it devolved into this assassination coup, American, brainwashing organization. But before that happened, it was intended to be, the repository of all intelligence, right? So you have desks. There's the Brazil desk. There's the
Right.
Russia desk. So the guy that runs the desk, all the information. So you're Agent A, and you hear something about Israel, it comes to the Israel desk, right? Agent B, it comes to the Israel desk, and then that gets disseminated. That goes to the rest of the agency. So the guy that runs the desk for any given country essentially is the choke point for all information going to the CIA and therefore the president about a given country. So James Jesus Angleton not only was the head of all secrets for the CIA, he also ran the Israel desk. Now,
Wow.
it gets even crazier. He was one of the founders of the Mossad. When they were forming the Mossad, he went over and he helped them figure out how to build it. This is not like, oh, this guy's just making stuff up. Read the scholarly work on the history, on the life of James Jesus Angleton. All the scholars, there's nothing controversial about anything I'm saying. He was also, and you know that you can be a Zionist even if you're not Jewish. In fact,
Right.
apparently there are more Christian Zionists than there are Jews in the world.
I did
And
not
by the
know
way,
that.
got to say this is very important. Not all Jews are Zionists. In fact, many, many, many of the greatest opponents to Zionism are Jewish people. And that's a long theological
Right.
story, which we won't get into. And now here's the other thing. You can be an anti-Semite, literally, and a Zionist. And James Jesus Angleton was one of them. He was
Wow.
raised in a very rarefied environment. He was a WASP. He went to Yale,
Mhm.
very rich, from a very rich family. And he was a dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semite as a young man. He was a big supporter of Ezra Pound, who was a poet. And Ezra Pound was a flaming anti-Semite and a pro-fascist. But you can be a fascist. Now, this is something else your listeners need to know. You can be a fascist and a Zionist. In fact, until fascism got a bad name, which didn't happen until the 40s, Zionists were very happy to call themselves fascists. Now,
Wow. That is
oh,
talk about a uh,
but all this is history, man. None of this is like, oh, he's just making this up. No, this is history. So what happened was
huh,
you had the Ottoman Empire, and they owned everything. They owned Turkey, they owned Egypt, they owned all the way to Morocco, they owned Palestine, they owned Syria, they owned Lebanon. They were on the wrong side in World War One. Oh well. And so that whole empire got cut up. Britain got Palestine and Egypt. France got Lebanon and Syria and so on. Now, the Zionists, and we'll call them revisionist Zionists because there are different flavors of Zionism. The revisionist Zionists believed, I'm not even kidding, you can read their own literature, that there was something wrong with Jewish people and they needed to be revised and improved.
right.
That's revisionist Zionism. They needed to be more aggressive, they needed to be more violent, and that because Judaism is actually a pacifist religion. They don't have, they talk about King David and everything, but
Right.
they really don't have warrior heroes. They have scholar heroes. They have
Right.
rabbi
Right.
heroes. They don't have warrior heroes because they believe in peace. That's one of the essences of the religion. Um, so I don't know where am I going with that? So the British were given Palestine to manage until the thing could be sorted out. And the revisionist Zionists who were pouring into Palestine didn't like the British because the British were treating everybody evenly. And the British kind of liked the Palestinians, especially the cops and the troops.
Right.
Kind of thought the Palestinian people, these kind of nice people. They're very hospitable. They invite us over for tea. So the revisionist Zionists literally paid a pilgrimage to fascist Italy because they believed that Mussolini would be a much better administrator of Palestine. Why? Because they saw what he did to the Ethiopians. One of the very first aerial bombardments of civilians in the history of the world was fascist Italy bombing Ethiopian villages. And the revisionist Zionists looked at that and said, you know what? Mussolini's our kind of guy. So they paid a pilgrimage to Mussolini. Mussolini saw them and said, yeah, we get you. And he allowed about 100 of the revisionist Zionist military people to enroll in the Naval Academy of fascist Italy.
Real quick before you go
It's
on.
all history, guys.
No,
It's
no,
all
it's amazing. It's amazing, and I'm gonna flip the script here. Like Netanyahu, what would he be? What he is now then? What would he be then?
okay. His father was a buddy of Mussolini.
Ah, because it makes
Okay.
sense. Because he reminds me of kind of what Mussolini would be like.
Absolutely. And Levitinsky. Okay, so Levitinsky was the guy that went and made the deal with Mussolini.
Right,
Mussolini had a personal secretary, and we're not talking about someone that typed and took, we're talking about somebody that made the world run around him.
right.
That was Netanyahu's father.
Got it.
He was one step removed from Mussolini himself.
Wow.
And
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, just from the personality wise.
yeah, and see, if you go, if you ever go to next time if you've never been to New York City or you've been or you're going to go whatever, make sure you go to up Fifth Avenue.
Hmm.
And when you go up Fifth Avenue, you'll eventually run into Central Park. But right before you hit Central Park is Rockefeller Center,
Yeah.
which was a big deal. You know, it just seems like another bunch of buildings. But when that was built, that was a big deal. Facing Fifth Avenue is a pavilion. I mean, it's an office building, but it was like a pavilion, especially made by the Rockefellers for Mussolini's government. And it's stamped right on it, Italia.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
loved those guys, the Rockefellers and people like him, like them, loved the fascists. Why? Because the fascists were into destroying labor unions and
Ah.
beating down the workers. And Mussolini was really good at it. Hitler was really good at it. And they
Mm.
thought these guys are pretty good. You know, Hitler was on the cover of Time magazine in the 30s as a great man. So was Mussolini. So you had this energy in Europe, this sort of, Europe went through a lot of stuff,
Right.
World War
Right.
I, catastrophe. So you had a lot of social turmoil. And Jewish people were very much on the forefront of reform. Like they were helping develop labor unions, they were agitators. And so I think there was a desire to let's divert a large percentage of the Jewish population into a more fascistic mindset. Let's support them. Let's let them come to our naval academy. Let's help them. Let's send them arms. Let's do, I mean, the revisionist Zionists had many negotiations with the Nazi government. They were not strangers to each other. They spoke on all kinds of issues. So I think that's really what was going on. And if we bring this full circle to James Jesus Angleton, think about this. Angleton was a rabid anti-communist, and I get it. And by the way, Kennedy was not soft on communism. We got to make sure that he was people said he was soft on communism. He was tough with them. The Cuban Missile Crisis is an example. He told them, get those missiles out of Cuba or we're going to have a problem. And
Right.
and he stared them down. But people just didn't like, or certain elements of our society didn't like him, and they tagged him with being soft on communism. But anyway, there was a whole rack of people in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s in the CIA, in the US government, in the US military, who were rabid anti-communists. Like they didn't want to talk to the communists, they didn't want to find a way of peaceful coexistence with them. They just wanted a constant war state. Angleton was one of them. And all of these people believe that we were actually in a state of active war. And therefore, here's the key: anything goes.
Wow.
Anything that puts America at risk of the communist menace, anything, we're allowed to do anything
Wow.
that we want.
Yeah.
Um, and so we had that kind of fascistic point of view in the CIA at the highest level. It's very important everybody understand James Jesus Angleton was not just another guy. He survived 5 different CIA directors. Like Dulles got fired. I think
Hmm.
most people that are aware of the history know that Allen Dulles was fired by JFK. JFK didn't even know to fire Jesus Angleton because he was so well protected. And Angleton stayed on all the way to the mid 70s. Angleton had another job, and this brings it full circle. He was the chief cleanup artist after the JFK assassination. Okay. I'll give you 2 examples of how this worked. You and remember, we're in 2024. Nobody knew this stuff in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s because so much of it was classified. The claim was that, oh, what's his name? Oswald was, lone nut, and
Right.
now we
Right.
know the CIA knew exactly who he was. A while ago, we learned that the CIA was reading his mail, right? And only 2 years ago, they let us know who was reading his mail. It was one of James Jesus Angleton's right-hand man whose cover was being a foreign trade lawyer who had offices in Israel, who was visiting Israel monthly. That was the guy that was tasked to track Oswald before the assassination. And they kept that man's name secret more than 10 years after he died. It only came out 2 years ago. So that's one example of the cleanup crew, right? That man was also sent when Marina Oswald was interrogated by the Warren Commission. That man was sent because he spoke Russian to sit in the audience and listen. He wasn't there in official capacity. He was there to make sure she didn't say anything that had to be covered up later. But there's even something worse. The head of the Mexico City CIA chief of Mexico City, there's a technical term, I forget what they call it, installation or eight office or whatever. He was not 100% on board with the narrative that it was a lone gunman and
Right.
everything.
Right.
Because remember, they had said that Oswald went to Mexico City, right? Remember, that's the thing.
I
He went
do
to
remember.
Mexico
Yeah.
City. Right. This guy knew, station chief for Mexico City. And this guy knew that Oswald didn't go to Mexico City, and that bothered him. Now check this out. This is history, guys. When he died, James Jesus Angleton personally got on a plane, flew to Mexico City, and browbeat his wife and cleaned out that man's entire library, his safe, his personal
Wow.
papers, the memoir that he was working on, and loaded it on a plane and took it all back to Washington. So James Jesus Angleton was the keeper of all CIA secrets. He was the head of the Israel desk. He was a rabid, crazed anti-communist. Uh, uh, and he apparently, it looks to me like he was and you know what, as head of counterintelligence, he would have been head of the cleanup, keeping all that information under wraps.
Right.
And he took dramatic steps to make sure it was kept under wraps. Now, there's one last piece to this. Israel did get the atomic weapons. To do that, they needed enriched uranium. And where did they get it? Well, it's pretty much believed now, and this is by the scholars, not the conspiracy theorists, the professors, that they stole it from a nuclear processing plant in Western Pennsylvania. By weird
I
coincidence,
was going
only
to say,
40
how would they
miles from.
steal it from Pennsylvania all the way over to?
Well, okay, the owner of the plant happened to be a Zionist.
Got it. Okay.
And it is widely believed by serious scholars, and not even in a debatable way, that Angleton actually assisted in the theft and transport of that material. Now, you might ask, if you're a logistics-minded person, you might go, how the heck could they do that?
Yeah.
Well, you have to remember Meyer Lansky, if you know the whole organized crime history, he was the real godfather of organized crime. He's the guy that put the organization to organized crime. He was, if you look into it, he was the financier. That means if you're bringing a ship over with 2 tons of heroin, nobody ever asks, well, who bought the heroin?
Right. Right.
Who chartered the ship? Who paid the guys on the ship? All right, somebody had to front all that money and make all that happen. That was Meyer Lansky. Well, one of the things Meyer Lansky did illegally was ship arms to Israel out of the New York ports with the cooperation of his friends in the Italian mafia who controlled the ports. So Lansky it would have been nothing for them to put this stolen stuff on a truck, send it to the New York ports, put it on a ship, and send it over to Israel. It would have been, they've been doing that. They were doing that for decades with
Right.
heroin. If you can move heroin, you can move. So 300 kilograms of enriched uranium was stolen over a 20-year period. And it appears, according to the scholars, that Angleton was involved in it. So now think about this. He's the head of counterintelligence. He's the head of the Israel desk. He knows very well that John F. Kennedy is fighting the Israelis on developing nuclear weapons. He's going behind their back and helping stolen enriched uranium end up in Israel. If he had gotten caught, hanging, right? This is a high treason capital offense,
right?
No question. The battle was going on between the Kennedys and the Israelis government in the summer of 1963. We all know what happened in the fall of 1963, and we all know what happened in 1968. And the little thread that got me started on this research, I was always puzzled that the zombie patsy fall guy for the Robert Kennedy assassination was a Palestinian. Right?
Syrian, yeah.
That's who they picked. And it's in the book, we have headlines. While Kennedy was still alive, he'd been shot in the head, he was in the hospital, he was still alive. They had full-page stories about Sirhan, the Palestinian, the anti-Semite, all this stuff. I'm like, really? Where did that come from? Because he wasn't talking to anybody. They found his diary, all these things. And they got that information so fast and put it in the newspaper so fast that Robert Kennedy was still alive. So if you think of and this is in the book, but I'm giving away a lot of secrets in the book, but that's okay. I'm more interested in people knowing this, right? Of course, I'd like you to buy the book because it just gets the word out better. But think of the logistics. You had most people, I think, know Kennedy was shot in the back of the head, right. Robert, and Sirhan was in front of him. And this is, again, not conspiracy
and
theory.
It was close, too. It was a close.
Right behind the ear.
Yeah.
Right behind the ear. They stuck the gun up and boom. And, you don't have to be and the guy that determined that was the chief medical examiner of Los Angeles County. It wasn't like, guy in his basement coming up with theories. It was the guy that did this for a living, right? And had previous to that been considered extremely skilled in what he did. So you don't need a PhD to know you can't shoot somebody behind the ear if they're 3 or 4 feet in front of you.
Wow.
Okay. So no doubt Sirhan was there. No doubt he had a pistol. No doubt he was pulling a trigger. Bullets, it was probably blanks because, there should have been, and it's a long story, but 11 shots came out of his I think he had a weird 8-shot revolver, which I find very strange, but that was the nature of the gun. But 11 shots came out. So the whole story, he wasn't the guy that did the killing. Somebody behind Kennedy did the killing. And if you think of logistics, you have one guy suddenly firing, everybody looks at him, and then one guy, all he has just to do is come back, it's over. And everybody's looking over there. It's the easiest. I mean, it's not a nice thing to say, but it's the easiest thing in the world. So there was a lot of organization there. You had to get the shooter there. They had to know Kennedy was going to be there. You had to get Sirhan there. You had to hypnotize Sirhan because it's pretty clear. In fact, one of the things we have in the book is a reference to a guy that's never talked about. And sadly, he just died a couple of years ago. This guy was a professor at Harvard University, Harvard Medical School for 38 years. He was one of the leading experts on hypnotism and trauma. And he had spent, I think, 120, something like that, hours examining Sirhan.
Wow.
And he came to the conclusion that Sirhan was like the Michael Jordan of hypnotizable people. Like we're all hypnotizable to a degree. Some of us are more resistant than others.
Right.
And some of us, you just say, bark like a dog, and the guy's barking. And that was really how Sirhan was. And even with all that, they had handlers for him, the girl in the polka dot dress, who everybody saw. We even have the original UPI press bulletin saying police are looking for a girl in a polka dot dress who accompanied Sirhan to the hotel. So logistics, somebody had to plan all that, and get all that going. And I have I know, I'm going to say, I know they didn't have one potential zombie guy. They had a bunch of them. They had a whole inventory of them that they could pull off the shelf at any time. Why did they choose a Palestinian? And why did they stick an article that was 3 weeks old
Right.
in his pocket
Right.
about Kennedy. It just, they were framing this guy, but they weren't just framing any old patsy. They wanted to frame a Palestinian. I puzzled over that for years. And then I learned who James Jesus Angleton was in detail. And I'm like, oh my God. And the more I dig into this guy, I'm still coming up with revelations even after the book's out. But I think everybody's heard, that you get it. He was the keeper of secrets. He was a rabid anti-communist who believed anything goes. He was the head of the Israel desk. He was apparently helping Israel steal nuclear materials from the United States. He was the cleanup man for the Kennedy assassination. And one other thing. He was the security guy for MK Ultra. It was his
Oh my
job.
God.
Yeah, because think about it. He was the keeper of all CIA secrets. And I don't mean he kept them in a drawer. I mean, he had to operationally work with everybody to figure out, how do we keep the secret? And if it does get out, how do we make it disappear? That was his job.
Wow.
So I'm not saying he did it. But I'm saying, if we're serious about figuring out who did this, especially Robert Kennedy, I personally feel it's a slam dunk. But you know, we probably need more information to know for sure. But if we're looking for, they always talk about the Cubans did it, the Soviets did
Right.
it, the mob did it, the CIA did it. But that's too vague to be useful. We
And
need
it's
to know
too
the
convenient.
guy, right? Right? Hey, you know what? There's this thing called Microsoft, and the tech guys did it. No. Bill Gates started you know what I mean? Like, there was a guy that started the company and made it all happen. That's the level of detail we need to know. And I want to bring this full circle. The assassination research community, for some reason, up until now, and I'm praying they change their spots, doesn't want to get into that level of detail. They want to talk about the angle, the gun, that was the sun in his eyes, and all that stuff's important. But we need to know who did it. And here's one last thing. They finally got rid of Angleton in 77. A new CIA guy came in, and Angleton was an alcoholic. He was very disruptive. He was just a train wreck, and he was finally fired.
Wow. Wow.
But it took all those years to get rid of him. He lasted a long, long time.
Well, before we get out of here, and I'm definitely going to have you back for a part 2. If it's not this book, well, you have other books I'd love to talk to you about. But we talked about Netanyahu, who he would be back in that era. How do you feel JFK and RFK would deal with the situation that's going on in Israel and Gaza and all in that area now? If they were if they were in that same mindset from 1961 to 1963.
Okay, 2 things. One, the tragedy is, had they lived, we never would have gotten to this point, because Israel wouldn't have gotten nuclear weapons, and they would have had to report their foreign lobbying. We know what JFK would have done, because he did it with the French in Algeria. The Algerian people, whose land it was, were fighting against the French in a very serious war. And he was on the side of the Algerians. In fact, when Algeria finally won, he brought the new president of Algeria, I forget what they do, 62 gun salute. He had all the different, the color guards, not just 3 guys, but like 20 guys deep for each of the military branches of the military. He had the vice president. He honored that man to the nth degree. We know Kennedy wanted peace in the Middle East. He was respectful and supportive of Jewish people. He was not into Zionist aggression and criminality. And he was pushing back on it. So number one, it never would have happened if they had lived, in my opinion. And number 2, he would not be tolerating what's going on at all now.
Yeah.
And we keep getting told that, oh, this is a special relationship and it's cemented in stone and it's always been this way. Not true. Not true. And it's, not only are we harming other people, we're harming our nation's reputation around the world. By being involved in this the way we're involved. We're the ones paying the bills. The day we stop paying the bills is the day the assault on the civilians stops. It'll be that fast. So that's my answer to your question.
No, I'm glad, because you answered it, and I appreciate that. Just because I feel that we always say woulda, shoulda, coulda, and what if and how America and how the world would be completely different if he would have lived. And so, but Well, this book, I hope everybody can go out and pick it up. Just go to Amazon, and you can also go to jfkantiwar.com, and you can check out some of his other books. But pick it up on Amazon, and leave a great review, and leave a 5-star. We'd love to see that. And Ken, thank you for being one of those warriors of going out and doing the work that many of us just sometimes think about and never get the chance to do or have the energy to do. So I appreciate you doing that.
Everybody does their bit. You know, we're a beautiful and noble and generous and kind people.
Yeah.
And what's going on with our government is not a representation of us, and we need to step up and say no.
Yeah. And I always say it's never, the Russian people, it's never the Israelis, the people itself. It's, Palestine. It's not the people. It's always the governments that are the ones that give the countries the bad name. It's not the people. So hopefully one day we will have the peace that we all deserve. But until then, let's just keep supporting each other as much as we can. So, but I appreciate you, Ken, and I hope you come back soon.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you, everybody. Like I said, for being part of this show today. Ken McCarthy, pick up his book one more time and go to Amazon, and you can go to jfkantiwar.com and support all these amazing authors that take their time and energy and their own money to go out and make these hidden secrets known. So, but thank you for supporting Truth Be Told, that every Friday here at 3 p.m. On the Club Paranormal Network.